because it has a static set to measure, and measuring fixed thing. The question is, who's measure complexity when everything is changing? And that's why we call it dynamic, because we're like a flame.
So we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for coming to another PCC forum. Robert, please, trying to start.
I'm sorry, it's my fault.
So, yeah, welcome. Before I introduce our guest this evening, I just wanted to quickly let you know about the next two forums that are coming. On March 8th, Friday, March 8th, we're going to have two PCC MA thesis writers, Chris McNulty and Laura Reddick, share the evening and each present on their own thesis research and then have a discussion about possible overlaps and let us know what the thesis writing process is really like on a personal level. And then 2 weeks from then, on Thursday this time, so it's Thursday, not Friday as normal, on March 21st, we're going to have Professor Fred Henri back, who, if you recall, lectured to us on the role of imagination in philosophy about a year ago. He also taught a course on Wordsworth, Prelude, last semester. He's going to be lecturing on Goethe's color theory, so that's going to be exciting. And don't forget, it's on Thursday. So now I have the privilege of introducing tonight's speaker. This is Professor Spyridon Kotrofinis. He is an assistant professor of philosophy at the Technical University of Berlin. And he tells me that as of 366 days ago, precisely, 63, let's get it right. As of 363 days ago, he has been visiting assistant professor at the Department of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. Spyridon's research focuses on process philosophy, the philosophy of biology, complexity theory, and classical metaphysics. Tonight, of course, he's presenting on the process philosopher, Henri Bergson. And this is really relevant for PCC. We don't study Bergson that often, although we did just last semester. Bergson is experiencing a bit of a renaissance these days, mostly as a result of the popularity of the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze. Also, another French thinker, the sociologist of science and increasingly philosopher of ecology, Bruno Latour, who's just now giving his Gifford lectures at the University of Edinburgh. He was also influenced by Bergson. So Bergson is in the air. So I'm excited tonight to welcome Spyridon to share his research into this both scientific and mystical thinker. Those are the kind of thinkers that we really love here at PCC. So please join me in welcoming Spyridon.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to talk here in the university. As Matt said, I have done work on Bergson and on Whitehead, and I tried to combine both philosophers and apply them into biological problems, especially the problem of embryogenesis and systems biological problems. This was my work in Germany, and it took me many years. So I always read Bergson from a Whiteheadian perspective, and I tried also to read Whitehead from a Bergsonian perspective. So far it was possible. And one of my future plans is to make a synthesis for a new process philosophy. So, as you can see from the title, I understand Bergson as a process philosopher. And this title, Process Philosopher of Life, will put emphasis on process and on life, and especially on Bergson's concept of life, because this is not only the biological concept of life, it's also a spiritual concept of life. And this is what I will try to show here tonight. And I don't want to emphasize one specific point in Bergson's thinking, but I want to give a general introduction and then put emphasis on some points which seem to me to be related to Whitehead's thought. So, my talk has 4 parts. First, I will try to, no, 5 parts. In the introduction, I will try to outline the time in which Bergson lived and worked, and because this is very important. I think he is the philosopher who was able to express best the character of his time, of the transition from the late 19th to the early 20th century. And then I will talk about his main concept, the concept of duration. And then I will apply it on the concept of his concept of matter. In the third point, we will focus on this very, very famous concept of Bergson, élan vital. It's a synonym, so to say, for his philosophy, with 2 applications. First on organisms, and second as the second point, the third too, the living eternity. This has to do with his concept of divinity, of God. And finally, I will conclude with a comparison of Bergson's and Whiteley's positions. So I will try. I will read my presentation. I hope this is okay for you, because otherwise it would take very long. Because talking about Bergson takes always very long. So, Bergson's place in Western philosophy. Between the last decades of the 19th century and the beginning of the First World War, a cultural tendency that is often described as neo-romanticism dominated a wide spectrum of the intellectual, aesthetic, and spiritual life of the Western world. Impressionistic, symbolistic, and Art Nouveau painting, architecture, literature, music are major constituents of this movement. Neo-romanticism was a reaction especially against mechanism and determinism in philosophy and sciences, utilitarianism in ethics, economism, collectivistic political ideologies, and the naive optimistic trust in all kinds of progress. The so-called philosophy of life that was influential in Germany, France, and other European countries between 1880 and 1930 was a philosophic perspective of this radical new way of thinking and feeling. One of the main representatives of philosophy of life, or Lebensphilosophie, as it was called in Germany, is Friedrich Nietzsche. The other main proponent of philosophy of life is the French Henri Bergson, who lived from 1859 to 1941, and whose hate of productivity and popularity remarkably coincides with the hate of neo-romanticism. Bergson's philosophy of life cannot be comprehended in its whole width if it is assessed with the criteria of German Lebensphilosophie. The latter emphasizes the human life world and its contrariety to the abstractions of mainstream sciences. On this basis, it develops an extended criticism on science and civilization, in the center of which states the crisis of modernity in European sciences. This is typical for Nietzsche and later for Husserl. Well, Husserl is not exactly a life philosopher, but he was influenced from this movement. We can find these positions also in Bergson's philosophy of life, but he does not at all confine himself in stressing the contrast between interiority of human experience and the abstract approach of natural sciences. The core of Bergson's thought consists in a metaphysics of nature and mind, which is based on his insights into the essence of time, freedom, matter, life, and divinity. The attempt to comprehend freedom and indeterminism as manifestations of a metaphysical creativity and to found on them the understanding of nature, human soul, and God runs like a golden thread through his work. Bergson's aim is the emancipation of Western thought from classical metaphysics. At the same time, without falling into positivism and nihilism, he offers an alternative to anti-metaphysical traditions like critical philosophy and empiricism that were developed out of the critique of classical metaphysics between the 17th and the 19th century. These, together with his principal criticism of ontologies that are grounded on the concept of substance, allows considering Bergson as a process philosopher. In my view, he is the most important forerunner of Alfred North Whitehead's process metaphysics. The starting point of Bergson's metaphysics is his intuitive approach to human experience of time. He considers the understanding of time in association psychology and theoretical physics of the late 19th and early 20th century to be nothing but a theoretical formulation of ordinary experience of time, which is adapted to the practical needs of everyday life. Our ordinary understanding of time has been formed by the usage of clock mechanisms. Both scientific and everyday understanding of time fail to recognize the essence of time experience and treat time as would it be a form of space. So Bergson says they spatialize time. Spatialisation is the French original word. To use Bergson's famous expression, as I say, they spatialize time. Bergson's concept of duration in French, durée, is, along with the élan vital, the most famous concept of his philosophy. The introduction of duration aims at the purification of our understanding and experience of time from our conception and experience of space. The duration is the actual, the pure time. It can neither be abstracted from a human subject's stream of experience, nor considered as the fourth dimension of the space-time of physics. If we deliberate our experience of time from the prevalence of spatialized time, as it is dictated by sciences and everyday life, we may develop a radically different concept of time as this of Newton that reduces time to a homogeneous carrier of consecutive events that is bare of all qualities. I mean that space as a homogeneous, this means homogeneity, but there are no qualities, it's the same quality everywhere. In his first book, Time and Free Will, published 1888, Bergson describes duration as a steady stream of the generation of experiences that continuously vary their qualities through their mutual interpenetration. Now I'm going to read a long quote from his first book. This is, I think, maybe the best introduction of the concept of duration, and you have it in the handouts. So this is the first long quote. Pure duration, la durée toute pure, is the form which the succession of our conscious states, our conscious states assumes when our ego lets itself live, when it refrains from separating its present state from its former states. It is enough that, in recalling these states, it does not set them alongside its actual state as one point alongside another, but forms both the past and the present states into an organic whole. as happens when we record the notes of a tune melting, so to speak, into one another. Might it not be said that even if these notes succeed one another, yet we perceive them in one another, and that their totality may be compared to a living being whose parts, although distinct, permeate one another, just because they are so closely connected. So this in one another and permeate each other is typical expressions for Bergson words. They come again and again in the whole work. We can thus conceive of succession without distinction and think of it as a mutual penetration and an interconnection and organization of elements, each one of which represents the whole and cannot be distinguished or isolated from it except by abstract thought. Such is the account of duration which would be given by a being who was ever the same and ever changing. Ever the same and ever changing. And who had no idea of space. In a word, pure duration might well be nothing but a succession of qualitative changes which melt into and permeate one another without precise outlines, without any tendency to externalize themselves in relations to one another, without any affiliation with number. It would be pure heterogeneity, heterogeneité pure. So as you see, he combines the idea of being beyond space, and beyond number, beyond quantity, with the idea of heterogeneity. I'm going to analyze it now. Feeling the duration of our successive mental states is to perceive them in one another. We experience our mental states as a qualitative multiplicity. This is another of Bergson's important technical terms. It comes again and again in his work. Qualitative multiplicity. That has nothing common with numbers or homogeneous geometric continua, like the empty space, or measurable quantities. Bergson introduces his concept of duration as the most important category of human mind. An essential feature of our duration is that its contents, our experiences, are not mental events that border on each other. Rather, they penetrate each other. But what is most important is that the interpenetration of the temporal extent of our experiences necessarily implies the interpenetration of their essences. In Bergson's philosophy of mind, mental states do not possess a fixed essence. Instead, they exist in the mode of mutual interdependence of essence. The nature of experiences is inaccessible to ontologists based on the concept of substance. Experiences are not atomistic events with unchangeable essences, which determine the relations between those events. The exact opposite is the case. Experiences mutually determine their essences through their relations. In metaphysics, relations that influence the essence of the related beings are called internal relations. The internal relationality of experiences gives duration its most characteristic feature, heterogeneous continuity. Bergson's description of our stream of consciousness as pure heterogeneity, heterogeneité pure, emphasizes the fact that our consciousness is a process that determines its own essence, which means that it continuously creates a principally unpredictable novelty. So I don't use the concept of essence as a synonym of a substance. I make a very clear distinction between essence and substance. Bergson always refers with the term duration to our subjective feeling that reflects the qualitative multiplicity, or maybe qualitative manifold, of our experience. The duration of our experience is its richness or plenitude, and not its objective and measurable length of life or lifespan. So the word lifespan means, I use this word lifespan today, not as a synonym of duration, but as a synonym for measurable time, external perspective of time. So again, the duration of our experience is its richness or plenitude, and not its objective and measurable length or lifespan, although there is a relation between duration and lifespan that I will explain later. Duration is an indivisible multiplicity or manifold because of being non-quantifiable due to its heterogeneity. Thus, duration cannot be understood in terms of size or quantity. Therefore, even the most advanced physics of our brains, supported by the most powerful computers that could ever be made, would not help us to comprehend the nature of our mental duration and to predict its development in time. So the concept of heterogeneous continuity or heterogeneous continuum refers exactly to the fact that duration is a process that is in every moment new. So there is not something that is constant, something that this would make it homogeneous, but it's a permanent creation of novelty. And therefore, because there is not something static in there, he says you cannot apply mathematics on this, because mathematical operations are not applicable to something, to a manifold that has not the same essence. For example, you cannot make an addition. You cannot add two things that have not the same essence. You cannot add oranges and apples. Of course, you can add them as fruits, but not as oranges and apples. They are different. So this is the first thing that we all learn in the elementary school. And this is exactly what does not apply on the concept of duration. And this is what is meant by heterogeneous continuum. So it's not quantifiable, and mathematical operations do not apply on it. Finally, Bergson's concept of duration also refers to our experience of the present as something extended and not as something infinitesimally short, as time points are described in physics. We do not experience our stream of consciousness as a juxtaposition of infinitesimally short pieces of time. So duration is the feeling of the presence has an extension, so to say. It's not a point in time. And he was a very good friend, as you know, of William James. So the idea of the specious present is very important in the work of Bergson. In his book, Matter and Memory, and Creative Evolution, Bergson upgrades the concept of duration to the most fundamental ontological category of his metaphysics and philosophy of nature. So I'm going to the next point, the duration of matter. Matter and Memory, which was published 1896, is Bergson's most demanding book. He introduces there a radical new view of perception, memory, and matter that enables him to revise the mind-body problem. In the last chapter of his book, Bergson anticipates essential findings of quantum theory, which appear 30 years later. Following the 19th century field theory of Faraday, Bergson thinks of atoms as of centers of force in which infinitely long field lines cross each other, so that, I quote, each atom occupies the whole space to which gravitation extends and all atoms are interpenetrating. So again, the idea of interpenetration, but this time applied to space and to matter. Bergson explicitly rejects the sharp separation between material entities and the forces through which they interact. This separation is due to the conception of atoms as small, indivisible, and interpenetrable physical bodies. For Bergson, this is one of the basal assumptions of science that serve practical needs of everyday life, since it allows us separating things from each other so that we can create limited areas of action in the material world. In contrast to this hypothesis of simple locality of matter, Bergson thinks that matter and fields are not spatially separated from each other, but form a continuum of spatially extensive actions. Thus, I quote, all division of matter into independent bodies with absolutely determined outlines is an artificial division. The conception of matter as inert body is also misleading in another aspect. It suggests considering material elements as static substances that lack any internal processuality. Field theory rejects this abstraction as well. Fields are conceived of as oscillating, spatially extended entities. Bergson's intuition about the continuous transition from matter to fields allows him to also consider material elements as vibrations. So he applies the idea of the electromagnetic field, for example, on matter. And he did that 1896. So all matter would be vibration. Each vibration of a material element has its own frequency, which means that the process of oscillation occupies a certain amount of time. There is no oscillation that is infinitely short. Starting from this, Bergson introduces the keenest assumption of his philosophy of nature. He considers the fact that elementary material processes require an amount of time, irrespective of how short-lived they are, as an indication for the metaphysical relatedness or metaphysical similarity between the temporality of matter and human duration. Each elementary physical process has a duration, the essence of which is similar to a human experience of duration. The duration that is implicit in matter is a consequence of an interior activity that is metaphysically related to human experience. In other words, the duration of material oscillation indicates an elementary level of mental activity or proto-mentality in matter. I quote from Matter and Memory, concrete movement of matter capable, like consciousness, of prolonging its past into its present. This is the interpenetration of past and present. Already possesses something akin to consciousness, something akin to sensation. End of quote. Bergson's answer to the psychophysical or mind-body problem is thus to assume that material processes and experiential activity are not metaphysically incompatible. He does not see another way to avoid the ontological gap between mental interiority and physical exteriority, except by introducing a wide continuum of experiential activity that contains all possible degrees of complexity, from highly complex conscious processes at one end to simple proto-mental material processes at the other. Thinking of matter as duration implies the idea that material processes have an elementary creativity that is beyond the reach of mathematics, since the latter cannot operate with entities that transform their own essence. Matter and Memory is one of those philosophic works that, long before the development of quantum theory, argues for the indeterminism of elementary natural processes without reducing this indeterminism to human epistemological or computational limitation. The connection of the mental activity of a process with its non-infinitesimal lifespan is typical for process philosophy in general. The proto-mental creativity of even the simplest quantum event prevents an external observer from precisely predicting the event's future or even observing the stages of the emergence of this event. The well-known Bergson scholar Milik Čapek has pointed out the similarity of Bergson's and Whitehead's positions regarding this insight and makes clear what influence the former had on the latter. In Science and the Modern World, Whitehead claims that every elementary process has an indivisible lifespan. He characterizes the creative proto-mental act of self-determination as a vibration of organic deformation. In 1925, Whitehead puts in a nutshell what Bergson was assuming 30 years before in his book Matter and Memory. I quote Whitehead from Science and the Modern World. This system, forming the primordial element, is nothing at any instant. It requires its whole period in which to manifest itself. In an analogous way, a note of music is nothing at an instant, but it also requires its whole period in which to manifest itself. If we divide time into smaller elements, the vibratory system as one electronic entity has no existence. This is what I mean when I say that we cannot observe the stages of the emergence of the process. We cannot divide the time. Milik Čapek summarizes the thoughts of both philosophers concerning the indivisibility of elemental material and other processes. I quote Čapek: "No process can be pinned down at an instant for the simple reason that there are no instants at all. You have either the whole process or nothing. The continual existence of macroscopic objects in space, for example this here, is a result of the rapid succession of microphysical durations. The apparent steady existence of macroscopic matter is the result of almost pure repetition of microscopic processes." This is the way I try to make it visible. Bergson says it very clearly in Matter and Memory that although matter has a duration, its duration is very, very short. He doesn't know how short. He has an intuition. He had this intuition because of Maxwell's electromagnetic theory. So the red and blue waves here in the picture symbolize, each of them symbolizes a process of material duration, so to say. Each of these processes is indivisible, as I say. It exists as one, or as one whole, or it it exists, it doesn't exist at all. And the succession of them is what produces the macroscopic time, so to say the abstract time, t, which is the variable in physics, is derived. It's not something primal, but it's something secondary that is derived from the process of matter. And the derivative character of abstract time, of macroscopic or macrophysical time, explains why non-elementary material processes, like the oscillation of a pendulum, for example, take time, although they lack even a proto-mental creativity. So Bergson would not say that the pendulum has a duration, because the duration has something to do with mentality. But it has a lifespan in this sense. It exists in the abstract time. But the reason is because the processes in there, which we cannot observe, they are durational processes. They are something like actual locations, so to say. So this picture is similar to the idea of societies or corpuscular societies of life. Now I'm going to make the transition to the third part, to Elan Vital, as a biological and spiritual dimension. In the most famous of Bergson's works, Creative Evolution, the term life has a double meaning. When it's used as a biological term, it refers to the totality of all living beings which have existed from the origins of life on Earth up to the present. But by talking of life, Bergson also often refers to an overall spiritual process that includes biological evolution. One of the less questioned assumptions about the nature of time that the sciences share with the logic of everyday life is that the past does not exist. The past time is gone and lost, so to say. This idea reduces the temporality of organisms to a juxtaposition of dot-like lengths of time, thus treating living beings as very complex dynamical systems. In contrast to a physics that considers past time as now no longer existing in the present, Bergson's understanding of duration as an indivisible continuum implies nothing less than the continued existence of what has been in the present. So what has been exists in the present. From this perspective, all details of the experiential history of a living being do also exist in the present. I quote Bergson, "The present state of an unorganized non-living body depends exclusively on what happened at the previous instant. In other words, the laws that govern unorganized matter are expressible in principle by differential equations in which time, in the sense in which the mathematician takes this word, would play the role of an independent variable. Nothing of the sort in the domain of life. The present moment of living body does not find its explanation in the moment immediately before. All the past of the organism must be added to that moment, its heredity, in fact, the whole of a very long history." End of quote. Merleau-Ponty summarizes Bergson's understanding of organisms as durational beings as follows. Bergson defines the living by history. He defines the organism and life as types of temporality and thereby places them outside of every comparison with a physical system. The organism is never identical with its past, nor is it ever separated from it. It's never identical because it's a permanent creation. it's a duration. Nor is it ever separated from it. And this is the aspect of continuity. It continues. Duration becomes the principle of the internal unity of it. Every living being, even the most primitive bacterium, is a psychophysical process. Its duration has a much higher tension than the duration of the atomic and molecular material processes that the organism includes. In other words, we have an organismic duration, which is the whole history. Because all organisms are also material beings, we have also very, very short-lived material vibrations or material processes, quantum events, electronic processes, whatever. Now the question arises, what mediates between these very different levels of duration? So to say, between the organismic duration, which can be years, and the microphysical or microchronic, microscopical duration at the lowest level. I will try to provide an answer later. In contrast to inorganic dynamic systems, organisms do not have a simple immediate past, but a history. Thus, based on his processual understanding of duration, Bergson introduces a biographic dimension as essential to the theory of organism. This biographical past situates organism in a realm that is beyond classical substance ontology and current systems theory. In Bergson's philosophy of life, organismic development is based not only on temporal but also on spatial interpenetration of processes. He describes the ability of living beings to relate themselves to other living beings and to their environment as instinct. Instinct is the spatial interpenetration of living beings. Instinct is one of the main faculties of all organisms. It is a specific form of perception that is not mediated through the regular senses. The instinct is an immediate sympathy or empathy between organisms, and even more importantly, between the cells inside an organism. Bergson's most famous example of organismic instinct is about the paralyzing instinct of some hymenoptera, for example, bees and wasps. Through very precise stings to the nerve centers of other insects or spiders, they paralyze them without killing them. The hymenoptera have something like an implicit knowledge of the anatomy of their victims, but no explicit knowledge, as scientists, for example, have. The instinct serves the self-preservation of life by extending the influence of the organism beyond the limits of its sensory organs. In other words, by generating a specific form of spatial continuity between the organism and its environment. In Bergson's words, instinct, I quote, instinct is a knowledge at a distance. Knowledge at a distance. However, this does not mean that the instinct is only an outwards directed faculty. Bergson repeatedly talks about the continuity between the organism's behavior in the environment and its inner organismic cellular processes. The instinct, I quote, the instinct that animates the bee is indistinguishable from the force that animates the cell, or is only a prolongation of that force. Now, in both cases, in the instinct of the animal and in the vital properties of the cell, the same knowledge and the same ignorance are shown. All goes on as if the cell knew of the other cells what concerns itself, as if the animal knew of the other animals what it can utilize, all else remaining in shade. Of course, from the perspective of today's molecular and evolutionary biology, Bergson's concept of cellular instinct must appear as an obsolete metaphor. According to these disciplines, cellular interactions are realized by signaling molecules and have been formed by a long evolutionary process. In creative evolution, Bergson develops a subtle critique of neo-Darwinistic explanations of the evolution of instincts. In other words, he discusses this possible criticism. I think, however, that his description of instinct as a knowledge at a distance stems from his previous book, Matter and Memory. There, he makes not only the suggestion that matter has a spatial extension, it is not localized, but he also introduces a theory of human and animal mental perception that operates with non-local connections between the subject and the object of perception. Therefore, I think that he would still argue that intercellular perceptions cannot be reduced to spatio-temporally localized material entities, like signal molecules. Given the conceptual framework of current quantum theory, Bergson's talking of instinct as sympathy may be reformulated on the analogy of non-local connections between processes. From the perspective of process philosophy, the best way to approach Bergson's idea of the immediacy of instinctive perception is considering it as a case of Whiteheadian physical prehension. Against the background of Bergson's theory of organismic duration, a question arises concerning the relation between instinct and duration. If embryogenesis is a durational process that requires instinctive perceptions, what connects instinct with duration? Instinct should not be understood as a faculty which is complementary to duration. Although its role is to overcome spatial separation, it is still a power of the durational processuality of the living being. Of course, the question is, how can a primarily spatial faculty, the instinct, be connected with a primarily temporal faculty, the duration? In the following, I will try to explain how the spatial interpenetration of living and lifeless matter emerges out of the dynamics of duration. As already mentioned, in creative evolution, the term life refers also to an all-embracing spiritual process that contains biological life. So biological life is a part of a spiritual process which is also called life. Bergson reflects the connection of divine and biological life by creating what is probably the most symbolic metaphor of his whole work. This is a very long quote, and it's the second quote of your handouts. Let us imagine a vessel full of steam at a high pressure, and here and there in the sides a crack through which the steam is escaping in a jet. The steam thrown into the air is nearly all condensed into little drops, which fall back, and this condensation and this fall represents simply the loss of something, an interruption, a deficit. But a small part of the jet of steam subsists, uncondensed, for some seconds. It is making an effort to raise the drops which are falling. It succeeds at most in retarding their fall. So, from an immense reservoir of life, jets must be gushing out unceasingly, of which each falling back is a world. The evolution of living species within this world represents what subsists of the primitive direction of the original Z, and of an impulsion which continues itself in a direction, the inverse of materiality. If I consider the world in which we live, I find that the automatic and strictly determined evolution of this well-knit whole is action which is unmaking itself, and that the unforeseen forms which life cuts out in it, forms capable of being themselves prolonged into unforeseen movements, represent the action that is making itself. End of quote. Bergson suggests that the emergence of automatism and determinism that characterize matter is the end product of a process which is unmaking itself. At the origin of this process, there is something totally unconditioned, pure action, which transcends all logical, mathematical, and scientific categories that intelligent beings could ever create. According to another position of creative evolution, I quote, "It is consciousness, or rather supra-consciousness, that is at the origin of life." Supra-consciousness is another word for that, what Bergson describes as an immense reservoir of life in this metaphor. In creative evolution, Bergson directly labels the ultimate principle of his metaphysics as follows. I speak of a center from which worlds shoot out like rockets in a fireworks display, provided, however, that I do not present this center as a thing, but as continuity, as shooting out. God, thus defined, has nothing of the already made. He is unceasing life, action, freedom, end of quote. The most famous concept of Bergson's philosophy, élan vital, refers to the universal process of the progressive transformation of the unconditioned divine creativity, the vessel full of steam in this metaphor, in the other metaphor. Excuse me, I have to repeat. So élan vital refers to the universal process of the progressive transformation of the unconditioned divine creativity to the totality of lifeless matter and living beings. The élan vital is in some important respect related to Plotin's concept of emanation. Plotin is the only one ancient philosopher to which Bergson shows a strong affinity. According to Plotin, the material world is the final product of a process of emanation, the source of which is the ultimate principle, or first hypostasis, which Plotin calls the One, because it is an absolute unity. He calls it also the Uden, non-being, because it cannot be characterized by human categories. The One is the ultimate ground of all beings, but at the same time it is beyond all categories of being. The second hypostasis, the intellect, nous, in the Greek original, emanates from the One. The third hypostasis, the soul, which is the soul of the world, or anima mundi, emanates from the intellect. The soul of the world generates and governs the most imperfect hypostasis, which consists the material world, which is enormous with its enormous plurality and differentiation. Bergson's concept of supraconsciousness and the metaphors of the vessel full of steam and the continuity of shooting out are equivalent to Plotin's concept of the One, to which Plotin also refers to as God. The élan vital could be considered as a modern version of Plotin's theory of emanation. The main commonality of both theories is that they do not describe the world as a creation of God, let alone as a creation out of nothing, but as a transformation of the divine energy. In both systems, God is transcendent and immanent to the world. In his essay, Introduction to Metaphysics from 1903, Bergson introduces one of the cornerstones of his metaphysics, the enormous manifold of qualitatively different levels of durations. According to this idea, there is a continuous spectrum of different degrees of the inner tension of durations. As mentioned above, the tension of duration is its ability to grow without losing its unity, so that it can perpetuate its own life. The higher the tension of a duration, the longer its life appears to an external observer. So this is the third long quote, and this is also on your handouts. So this is from Introduction to Metaphysics from 1903. The intuition of our duration puts us in contact with the whole continuity of durations, which we should try to follow either downwardly or upwardly. In the first case, we advance toward a duration more and more scattered, whose palpitations, more rapid than ours, dividing our simple sensation, dilute its quality into quantity. At the limit would be the pure homogeneous, the pure repetition by which we shall define materiality. In advancing in the other direction, we go toward a duration which stretches, tightens, and becomes more and more intensified. At the limit would be eternity. This time not only conceptual eternity, which is an eternity of death, but an eternity of life. It would be a living and consequently still moving eternity, eternité vivante, and which would be the concretion of all duration, concretion de toute durée, as materiality is its dispersion. So we see very clearly says that we have a continuum, not only the duration is a continuum itself, but there is a continuum of different kinds of durations. And the élan vital is exactly this movement from the eternal, from the living eternity, eternité vivante, to matter. For Bergson, duration is not only a psychological, but a metaphysical concept. The idea of the continuum of durations with different tensions implies a continuum of different, but not metaphysically incompatible modes of being. In this way, Bergson tries to overcome Descartes' dualism between conscious and material substances. Where consciousness and matter are two ontologically different substances, it would be logically impossible to resolve the antithesis between them. But understanding them as durational processes allows us to consider them not as ontological opposites, but as the two ends of a spectrum that expresses the same ontological idea, duration. This is the same ontological idea. The layers of this spectrum symbolize all possible degrees of tension or all possible degrees of creativity and freedom. This idea is the basis of the conception of élan vital as the universal process of continuous generation of less creative processes out of more creative processes. The élan vital emanates directly from the totally unconditioned supraconsciousness and terminates at the mode of being of almost total determination. This is the mode of being that characterizes matter. So I have created this picture here. Bergson has no pictures for élan vital. I understand the emanation as this transformation of something that comes from the living eternity and it becomes materiality. And at the lowest level, here you have this pure succession. And this, from materiality, from the order of succession, the abstract time of physics can be derived. So the problem with this picture and with all pictures of this kind is that it suggests that the levels of duration exist like the levels of a skyscraper. And this is not the case. Also, it's not. It would be wrong to understand it as stating that you have everywhere in the space of the universe these levels of duration. This is also not the case. There is heterogeneity also in the space. But it's extremely difficult to make a picture that can pay attention to all these details. So we can discuss about this later because Bergson uses the concept of virtuality. So he says that the different levels of the duration exist virtually, not actually. This is another modal logic. This is not the Aristotelian modal logic, which operates with potentiality, actuality, but with virtuality, actuality. I can say something later to this. The process of the emergence of materiality out of the initial and totally free living eternity is itself a process of the emergence of conditions of existence. This process of transformation of the initial pure action to lawful and almost totally conditional materiality is not governed by natural or any other laws. So the laws of nature do not exist in the higher levels, so to say. They appear in the lower levels. Therefore, not only its duration is a heterogeneous continuum, but also the whole process of transformation of the mode of being to another. Excuse me. Not only its duration is a heterogeneous continuum, I mean each of these lines here, this symbolizes durations. We have a heterogeneous continuum in the horizontal direction, but we have also a heterogeneous continuum in the vertical direction. And this has to do with what I just explained, the virtuality. In other words, the élan vital itself is a heterogeneous continuum. Within the metaphysical framework, within this metaphysical framework, its living being, its organism, has to be conceived of as a complex that integrates the lowest level of quantum physical durations with many higher levels of durational processes. Thus, a number of increasingly determined or decreasingly free processes are engaged between the highest duration of the organism and the lifespan of which is the life of the organism, many years maybe, and the duration of the lowest level, which is the level of quantum physical processes. And this is the answer to the problem that I mentioned before. We don't have just one long duration and many very, very small durations. We have a whole continuum. The idea of emanation gives also a hint how to think about the connection of a primarily spatial faculty, the instinct, with a primarily temporal faculty, the duration. This was the second question. The immediate perceptions between cells or even different organisms, as well as the entanglement between quantum processes, appear in another light if we consider those non-locally connected processes as being rooted in a single higher level process. So to say, these processes here emanate from a higher process, they have they have an initial unity, so to say, and something of them of this unity is preserved in their actualization on the lower level. Non-local connectivity reflects nothing but the initial unity out of which the connected entities have emerged. This means the duration of a higher level. Finally, I would like to point to an important similarity between Bergson's and Whitehead's conceptions of God. For both philosophers, the idea of God is an exemplification of the central metaphysical ideas. God is not an exemption to the metaphysical ideas in both philosophies. In Bergson's thought, both God and God's emanation can only be conceived of as specific forms of durational processes. God is the process with the highest tension. At the same time, it immediately participates in the history of the whole universe as being not only transcendent but also immanent in the world because of emanation. God directly experiences everything that has occurred as a result of divine emanation. Even in his early work, Matter and Memory, Bergson talks of a superior consciousness for which the whole history of humanity would be contained in only one moment of its own stream of experience. In one moment of the stream of experience of this superior being or superior consciousness. So besides being the ultimate creativity, the highest tension of duration, the divine process embodies also the ultimate faculty for preservation. This is the perfect universal memory. Bergson's concept of God as the first duration or and living eternity anticipate Whitehead's conception of the consequent nature of God as an everlasting process. This is Whitehead's word, everlasting, not eternal. But living eternity is, in my opinion, what Whitehead calls consequent nature of God, or everlasting temporality. And this everlasting process integrates in itself all temporal processes of reality and thus preserves them. So, can I take 3 more minutes?